Jeffrey Dahmer vermoordde in de loop van 13 jaar 17 jonge mannen. Hij sneed zijn slachtoffers open omdat dat hem seksueel opwond. Hij bewaarde hun afgesneden lichaamsdelen en aan het eind at hij hun dij, biceps en hart op. Hoe kon een ogenschijnlijk onschuldig kind een gruwelijke seriemoordenaar worden? Waren het de omstandigheden die hem dreven? Of was zijn moordlust genetisch bepaald? Goedenavond en welkom bij Reportage. Jeffrey Dahmer is een van de meest beruchte seriemoordenaars van de vorige eeuw. Hij was seriemoordenaar, maar dat niet alleen. Hij was ook homoseksueel, necrofiel en kannibaal. Hij pikte jongens op in de kroeg, nam ze mee naar huis, drogeerde ze, vermoordde ze en pas als ze dood waren had hij seks met ze. Vervolgens sneed hij ze in stukken. De voor hem opwindende lichaamsdelen bewaarde hij om er nog een aantal keer seks mee te hebben. Andere delen verdwenen in de ijskast, zodat hij die later op kon eten. Zo werd hij echt één met zijn slachtoffers, vond hij. Wat dreef deze Jeffrey Dahmer tot het plegen van dergelijke ziekelijke moordpartijen? Hij is opgegroeid in een normaal gezin, dus daar heeft het niet aan gelegen. Ook zegt hij zelf nooit uit haat te hebben gemoord. Maar waarom heeft hij dan telkens weer de verkeerde keuzes gemaakt? Gruwelijke keuzes die Jeffrey Dahmer uiteindelijk hebben gemaakt tot wie hij was. Het monster van Milwaukee.
You think of the crimes that he committed. They're so horrific, you kind of think only a madman or somebody totally evil incarnate would do this. But when you talked with Jeff Dahmer, you just did not get this idea. He could be engaging, he could be bright, witty, he could make jokes. He was able to fool a lot of people.
People that worked with him had no idea that he was a violent man. This was part of the real danger of Jeffrey Dahmer. He could join you or me at lunch and no one would detect that he was a violent person.
Jeffrey Dahmer on the surface was not an abnormal appearing individual. He was fairly good looking, he was well spoken, he was articulate.
Never in a million years would I have guessed a homicidal maniac.
To me, he's always been really a tragic figure, which is kind of hard for a lot of people to understand. But I don't really think of him as, the serial killer monster. I just think of him as this kid who was spiraling out of control and nobody stopped him.
Jeffrey Dahmer groeit op in het plattelandsstadje Bath in Ohio. Als een doodgewoon jongetje in een middenklasse-milieu. Robert Ressler heeft Jeffrey Dahmer na zijn arrestatie geïnterviewd. Hij was toen gedragswetenschapper bij de FBI en heeft de term seriemoordenaar bedacht. Dankzij vele jaren ervaring in het interviewen van seriemoordenaars, waaronder John Wayne Gacy, kreeg Ressler een uniek inkijkje in het brein van Dahmer.
There is no evidence with Jeffrey Dahmer of any severe mistreatment or abuse in his childhood. His mother had a mental problem. She was depressed most of the time. She slept a lot and dropped out of family activities. The father was a PhD chemist and a very busy and very intelligent man who spent a great deal of his time at work.
Pat Kennedy was meer dan 25 jaar politieagent in Milwaukee. In de zomer van 1991 werd hij op de zaak Jeffrey Dahmer gezet. Hij heeft 6 lange weken met hem doorgebracht en leerde hem beter kennen dan menig ander.
He was a product of upper white middle class. He was educated. He came from a family of means.
De strubbelingen tussen zijn ouders zorgen ervoor dat Jeffrey zich alleen voelt staan. Hij richt zijn aandacht vooral op dieren. Maar die bekijkt hij heel anders dan de meeste kinderen.
He stated when he was a very young child, 7 or 8, he had found a decomposed squirrel. And the bones were there. He kind of took it apart. He said that he found a roadkill and he wanted to see what was inside it, like a raccoon or a dog. He brought that home. A dead dog that he found on the side of the road was hit by a car. Cut that open and looked at the insides of that.
Jeffrey begint al op jonge leeftijd. Hij gaat overal op zoek naar aangereden dieren voor zijn macabere verzameling. De fascinatie voor botten blijft hij ook in zijn volwassen leven houden. Alleen gaat hij van de botten van dieren naar die van mensen.
As he got to be about 13 or 14 and he was coming into his sexual awareness, that he had some kissing with another boy in the neighborhood, and he realized that he was attracted to boys. Becoming aroused sexually, and the cutting up of these animals somehow became enmeshed together. So what he did as a young man with animals, he eventually did do later on in life with human beings.
John Bagdorf ontmoet Jeffrey Dahmer voor het eerst midden jaren 70 op de Revere High School, waar ze samen op zitten. John, wiens artiestennaam Durf is, heeft zijn tienerjaren met Dahmer verwerkt in een stripverhaal.
Dahmer? Well, he had a pretty rough time here, as did a lot of us. He was a constant victim of harassment and abuse. He was beat up a lot, especially early on. Later, they sort of got bored with him, but early on, I imagine he had it pretty tough.
Dahmer vertelde over zijn jeugd aan Robert Ressler. De opnames van dit gesprek zijn nu voor de allereerste keer te horen.
I was up visiting a friend's house, walking back home in the evening, and I saw these three seniors from high school approaching me in the darkness. And I just had a feeling that something was going to happen. Sure enough, one of them took out a billy club and whacked me on the back of the neck.
When we got to high school, it was when suddenly he became this incredible freak, with the drinking and erratic behavior.
Dahmer is erachter gekomen dat hij met drank de kwellende onzekerheid over zijn seksuele identiteit en zijn sinistere fantasieën kan verdoven.
Did you have problems with daydreaming where you didn't concentrate in school?
Well, in junior year, that's when I started drinking, so that was a problem, yeah.
Were you ever called on the carpet for that?
A couple of times.
Yeah. Did you have problems as a result of that?
I was punished for it.
Yeah.
Obviously, someone getting drunk at 7 in the morning is not a good thing. Showing up at school just reeking of booze.
Jeffrey wordt een eenzame puber die zich liever niet met anderen inlaat. Hij komt hooguit ongewild in het middelpunt van de belangstelling te staan.
Well, I was on the yearbook staff along with a couple other of my friends. So we would goad Dahmer into sneaking into various photos for the yearbook, and one of those was the National Honor Society, which obviously he was not a member of. And when the advisor caught a look of it, as we were pasting it up, he blacked his face out of the photo, which they then ran, which is sort of a symbol of his wasted youth. Just this blacked out face, the boy who didn't exist.
De complexe Jeffrey lijkt het liefst op de achtergrond te blijven, maar heeft tegelijkertijd de wanhopige behoefte om de aandacht te trekken.
A bunch of us got together and put a pool in of $35, I think it was, for him to put on a performance at the mall of his seizures and epileptic fits and various acts of weirdness.
Durf herinnert zich dat Dahmer graag met dieren experimenteerde. Dat bleek toen ze een keer samen gingen vissen.
Pulled a fish out of the lake, just a little sunfish, and took out a pocket knife and slashed it to bits. And my other friend said, "What the hell did you do that for?" And Dahmer responded, "I just wanted to see what it looked like."
De fascinatie voor dode dieren die Dahmer in zijn kindertijd heeft, krijgt een vervolg in de fantasieën die hij als puber krijgt over seksuele handelingen met dode of bewusteloze mannen.
Dahmer told me that on one occasion he had seen in the newspaper an account of a young man who was killed on a motorcycle. And he fell in love with the individual just from the photograph. He actually went to the funeral home to view the corpse, but he became so aroused that he excused himself into the bathroom where he masturbated.
Dit blijkt ook uit de fantasie die hij heeft over het vermoorden van een jogger.
He thought he would wait in the bushes with a baseball bat. This guy would come by and he'd bonk him in the head and he'd have this guy. And he actually said he went out and waited for the jogger one day with a baseball bat, but he didn't come by that day.
Het stuklopen van het huwelijk van zijn ouders betekent ook dat Dahmer nu helemaal alleen is met zijn fantasieën.
His mom split and his dad had already left and he was left alone in the house. But the adults really failed him, there's no question. His parents, his teachers.
Were you pretty upset by that breakup?
I knew it was inevitable.
Yeah.
It was pretty obvious. Yeah, I was upset.
Yeah.
Depressed.
Yeah.
Nothing to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Dit schept de mogelijkheid voor het plegen van zijn eerste moord.
Dahmer told me that one fantasy that he had was that he would encounter a hitchhiker, and he would have a narrow waist, broad shoulders, a bare chest. He would not have a shirt on, and he would have very little hair on his body. He would pick up this hitchhiker, and that they would have a great time together and all sorts of sexual adventures. He was driving down the road, and he saw his fantasy hitchhiker.
Het onderwerp van zijn fantasie is de 16-jarige Stephen Hicks. Hicks is een vrijgevochten jongen die liftend op weg is naar een popfestival. In de jaren 70 is liften in Ohio nog heel gebruikelijk. En de jonge Hicks heeft geen idee wie hij zal ontmoeten in de auto.
He brought the guy home. They had access to alcohol. They were drinking. They got a little intoxicated. But when the guy wanted to leave, Jeff did not want him to leave. He wanted him to stay because he was lonely and also he was intoxicated. He said that when he tried to stop the guy from leaving, a little bit of a wrestling match broke out. And as they were wrestling around, that's when Jeff grabbed the hand barbell and smashed the guy on the head. Now, he said when he hit him, he wasn't thinking, I'm going to kill this guy. I just want to keep him here.
Dahmer snijdt het lichaam in stukken en doet die in plastic vuilniszakken. Hij is van plan ze ergens te dumpen, maar wordt dan wegens een kleine verkeersovertreding aangehouden door de politie.
As he was writing him a ticket and came back to give him the ticket for crossing the yellow center line, he like any police officer, he took his flashlight and flashed inside the car to see if there's any weapons or any contraband, like any good cop. And he saw the 5 bags. And the guy actually said, hey, what's that back there? And he said, oh, that's just some trash I was going to take to the dump that I just didn't get there yet. And the cop gave him the ticket for crossing the center line and left.
Het is de eerste gemiste kans om Dahmer tegen te houden. En er zullen er nog vele volgen.
This is Dahmer's house. This is where he killed his first victim. He took it into this crawl space and apparently stripped the flesh off the bones underneath there. And when the cops went in there, turned this light on and the whole thing lit up. Ceiling, floor, walls, everywhere. Just covered in dried blood.
Daarna slaat hij de botten in stukken met een moker. Vervolgens gaat hij de bossen in waar hij al rondjes draaiend de botten wegslingert.
He said for the next couple of weeks he'd read the paper every day to see was there anything about this guy missing or anything. Never did. So he realized, I got away with murder. I killed somebody and nobody knows about it. I'm gay and nobody knows about it. Again, from the very beginning, more secrecy became part of his life. It also tortured him. And that's kind of how it started, and then it just grew from there.
Het duurt maar liefst 9 jaar voor Dahmer opnieuw aan het moorden slaat. Maar daarna kan hij er niet meer mee ophouden. Jeffrey Dahmer begint met drinken als hij gaat studeren. Het lukt hem niet om een normaal leven te gaan leiden.
After he had flunked out of Ohio State for being drunk and then got kicked out of the Army, he had a short stint down in Florida It didn't last very long.
Zonder baan en diploma's komt Dahmer terecht bij zijn oma in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hij heeft nog steeds de behoefte om opnieuw te gaan moorden en probeert troost te vinden in het geloof.
And he said when he first came to West Dallas, he would go with grandma to church on Sundays. He tried to read the Bible. He totally didn't do anything homosexual. He didn't try to get involved with any kind of gay stuff. He said he really thought, this is the way to go. Religion is going to be my savior.
Jeffrey weet enige tijd zijn neigingen te onderdrukken. Maar dat blijkt al snel stilte voor de storm.
An interesting thing that tipped the balance for him was he was at the Wauwatosa Library. As he was sitting there reading a book, a young man walked by him and threw a crumpled up piece of paper in front of him and walked by. And Jeff took it, opened it up, and inside it said, if you want a blowjob, meet me in the men's room.
Do you think that note-throwing thing was kind of a catalyst, kind of a trip-off?
It seems that way to me. Because that's when everything started falling apart again.
What did that mean to you? I mean, this thing.
I was just sitting there sort of throwing out a challenge to whoever, and sure enough, it started falling apart.
You didn't follow the guy.
I didn't.
You didn't meet up with him.
He said that set the stage for seeking more contact from a sexual side with young men, and that led to homicide, and that went on 17 more times.
Dahmer is niet in staat tot normaal contact. Om zijn necrofiele neigingen te kunnen botvieren begint hij in 1985 homo-sauna's te bezoeken. Daar lokt hij partners mee naar een cabine waar hij ze drogeert.
He was a very selfish lover. He wanted to be the giver. He did not want to be the receiver of homosexual sex. He enjoyed oral and anal sex, but did not want anyone to perform anal sex on him.
Voor Dahmer is seks een middel om fysieke controle over zijn partner uit te oefenen. Als bekend wordt dat hij jongens drogeert, wordt hij geweerd uit de homo-uitgaansgelegenheden. Daarom wijkt hij uit naar hotels.
Jeff met an individual at a tavern and convinced him to come back where he had a room here at the Ambassador Hotel. And he brought the gentleman back to his hotel, drugged him with the drug-alcohol combination. And then Jeff himself, according to he blacked out. When he woke up in the morning, this person was lying next to him dead, and was beaten about the face and the chest and the body. And Jeff figured that he did kill him, but he didn't. He couldn't remember doing it because he was in an alcoholic blackout.
He went to a department store across the street, and he bought a very large suitcase, or a small trunk, if you will, and brought it up to the room and put the body in it, and actually had the hotel busboy help him bring the body down to the street where he hailed a cab. The cab driver helped him load it into the cab and said to Dahmer, this is really heavy, buddy. What do you got in here, a body? And Dahmer said, yeah, I do, and they both laughed about it.
After the ambassador one, did you find that pleasurable, or was that equally frightening? Yeah. For what reason was that one frightening?
Because it was totally unplanned. It was a total surprise to me that it happened.
That it happened, yeah.
Nu begint er een reeks van moorden in Milwaukee, die in totaal 5 jaar in beslag zou nemen. Officier van justitie Michael McCann kan zich die tijd nog goed herinneren.
Dahmer killed 16 young men between 1987 and 1991. We had no idea that a serial slayer was operating in our city.
Dahmer pleegt vanaf dan de ene na de andere moord. Soms zitten er maanden, soms maar enkele weken of dagen tussen de ene en de andere slagpartij. Na de 4e moord begaat hij in augustus 1988 een fatale vergissing. Zijn 5e slachtoffer weet namelijk te ontsnappen. De politie wordt ingelicht en Dahmer wordt gearresteerd voor aanranding en het maken van naaktfoto's van de 13-jarige jongen. Justitie weet niets van zijn dodelijke slachtoffers en veroordeelt Dahmer tot slechts 12 maanden gevangenis. Zijn advocaat is Gerald Boyle.
He had to spend first year in a very, very uncomfortable environment of the county jail. or he could only get out to go to work. A very hard way to serve time. So the judge gave him this very strong sentence, but nobody could guess. He had already killed 4 people by that time.
Dahmer weet strafvermindering te krijgen dankzij een wanhopige smeekbede voor de rechter. Hij zegt spijt van zijn daad te hebben en belooft nooit meer dezelfde fout te begaan. Al snel zal blijken dat dat een loze belofte is.
It just started with having pornographic homosexual sex, and then actually having homosexual sex with people in the baths, and then having sex and killing, and then having sex with dead people, and then having sex with the viscera, and then actually eating the people that he had sex with to get this superb orgasmic experience.
Welkom terug bij deze reportage over Jeffrey Dahmer, het monster van Milwaukee. Nadat hij al 4 jongens heeft vermoord, wordt Jeffrey Dahmer op 26 september 1988 gearresteerd wegens het drogeren en misbruiken van een 13-jarige jongen. Hij wordt hiervoor slechts veroordeeld tot 12 maanden cel. Op dat moment heeft niemand door dat ze met een levensgevaarlijke seriemoordenaar, necrofiel en kannibaal te maken hebben. Na 10 maanden wordt Dahmer zelfs vervroegd vrijgelaten. Hij verhuist van zijn oma naar een flat in Oxford Apartments, nummer 213.
So here's the building where it used to be, and now the city has done nothing with this. Absolutely nothing. It just sits there fallow. Now the building was in this design. It was a rectangle, 3-story, white stucco, 36-unit apartment.
Achter deze deur heeft Dahmer vrij spel om zijn fantasie uit te leven. Het is een plek van dood en vernietiging. Veel van zijn slachtoffers pikt Dahmer op in homokroegen.
This area here is pretty much where kind of the gay area kind of starts. This place right here, 219, was the place he liked to go for the, they would have the drag shows. And right next to it, C'est La Vie was another one of his favorites. As we go this way, there's a couple. Now, he was considered kind of a honey. I mean, he was a nice-looking guy. I mean, people thought he was nice-looking. And like I said, I wish I could be as lucky with women as this guy was with men. I mean, he got laid a lot. And he didn't kill everybody that he was sexually involved with.
Barman Tony Timer kan zich Jeffrey Dahmer nog goed herinneren.
Come to the back bar and he'd order a drink and he'd get a drink and he'd go and he'd sit in the corner. He was in his own little world, or like he was always waiting for something, which obviously he was.
In deze kroeg ontmoet Dahmer een vriend van Tony, Eddie Smith.
Eddie was such a wild, crazy person, so you couldn't help but like him, which, Dahmer did. And so they knew each other real well. Well enough to make him comfortable enough to go into a house and take photographs.
Eddie wil fotomodel worden en Dahmer weet hoe hij daarop moet inspelen. Per fotosessie krijgt Eddie $100 van hem.
Eddie would be sitting at the bar and all of a sudden, sometimes he would turn around and say, I gotta go, gotta make some money. And I'm like, where are you going? And he'd just turn around and look towards the hallway and I'd see Jeffrey standing right there. And I'm like, oh, you're going. Okay. Well, call me when you're whatever,
Op woensdag 24 juni 1990 heeft Eddie een ontmoeting met Dahmer. Ze worden samen dansend gezien in de Phoenix Club.
He just left with Dahmer and never came back.
Pas jaren later bij het proces beseft Tony dat de rustige man die altijd aan het eind van zijn bar zat dezelfde man is die Eddie op gruwelijke wijze heeft omgebracht.
The community was shattered, people stopped coming out. That blew my life apart. It didn't just affect my life.
Dahmer heeft het niet alleen op de homogemeenschap voorzien. Hij is een opportunistische moordenaar die altijd op jacht is naar een eventuele prooi.
One of his victims was in the bus stop right here. Right up here is a young man from Upper Michigan who was just down here visiting. And Jeff Dahmer met him in the bus stop right over there in front of that McDonald's and convinced him to come home with him. And that was the end of that guy.
Some of the men that he victimized were homosexual, some were not. He would approach them and suggest that he'd like to take pictures of them. Would they come to his apartment? He had already prepared at that apartment a drug that he would induce them to drink.
He said once he snapped the lock on the door and the person was in his apartment, he seemed to become more aggressive, more powerful. It was almost like a psychological transformation, and he became more sexually aroused.
He would lay listening to their heart, and he trained himself to learn when they were coming out of the drug-induced coma by their breathing, because it would start to get kind of sharp and short from the long breathing of a drug-induced. And that's when he knew it was time to kill them.
Dit is het moment om orale seks met zijn slachtoffers te hebben voor hij ze wurgt en aan stukken snijdt. Vaak bewaart hij dagenlang lichaamsdelen in zijn flat.
Sometimes he would have sex with the individual as they were unconscious, but always after they were dead as well. So it became, I think the preference was for the dead person because that way he didn't have to deal with conversation. He didn't have to deal with denials or rejections. It was strictly on his own turf at that time. He had all of his victims back at his apartment where he would be able to enjoy himself by going through the rituals that he needed to perform. Acts of sexual activity combined with destruction of the bodies.
He would come back from work and make love with the dead body. He would sleep with it. He would lie with it. He would rub it and have sex with it.
He was just very, very enamored with the concept of opening a body, seeing the internal organs spill forth, and several of the bodies he would put in his bathtub and pack with ice in midweek because he had to work the next day, so he could keep them for the weekend where he'd have more time to enjoy himself with these bodies. He said to do that he'd have to shower with cold water so he wouldn't melt the ice. It was uncomfortable, it was well worth it.
Alleen iemand die Dahmers obsessie voor dood en lijken deelt, kan misschien inzicht geven in zijn duistere fantasiewereld. Nico Claus is beter bekend als de vampier van Parijs. Deze cannibalistische moordenaar bracht in oktober 1994 een man in koele bloeden om. Na een gevangenisstraf van slechts 7 jaar loopt hij nu weer op vrije voeten rond.
So I can really relate to somebody like him. I can understand what went through his mind and what his obsessions were. He was really concerned with the aesthetics of death, how beautiful they looked like in his eye. This is why he took photographs of his victims. He would pose them in twisted positions.
Yeah, what was the idea of the posing there?
It was just a way to exhibit control, the way I wanted them to look, and to accentuate the physique.
Keeping these photographs then was important to you as well.
I'd use them for masturbation.
Yeah, and you had a lot of them.
Right.
It continued on and grew in momentum, that the passions and the lust became stronger. His want to look for this perfect orgasm, I guess you could call it. He had to do more and more things in order to have this satisfying orgasm. It just started with having pornographic homosexual sex, and then actually having homosexual sex with people in the baths, and then having sex and killing, and then having sex with dead people, and then having sex with the viscera, and then actually eating the people that he had sex with to get this superb orgasmic experience.
Hoe komt een mens ertoe dat hij uiteindelijk alleen nog maar mensenvlees eet? Alleen een andere kannibaal kan dat verklaren. Nico werkte als medewerker in een mortuarium in Parijs. Daar proefde hij voor het allereerst mensenvlees.
There is a state of euphoria, right after you have done it. You really feel on a big high. and you are like on the top of a mountain.
During dismemberment, I saved heart, muscle meat, thigh, arm, bicep, liver. Cut it into small pieces, washed it off, put it in these clear plastic freezer bags, and put them in my floor freezer. Just as an escalation, trying something new to satisfy. And I would cook it, and then look at the picture and masturbate afterwards.
Afterwards? Did that have any positive effect to that ritual? It satisfying?
It made it feel like they were more part of me.
What he did was he bought an adaptable grill to put on his gas stove. We found this, and he said he would just kind of sear it on both sides with a little oil. He did add some condiments to it, some vegetables and mushrooms and onions. And towards the end there, that's the month before we caught him, pretty much the only meat that he ate was human.
Flesh tastes like horse meat in my experience, but of course it depends on the part that you eat.
Uiteindelijk wil Jeffrey Dahmer een partner die hij volledig onder controle heeft, levend of dood.
He began fantasizing that he could make things much better for himself by creating a sex zombie. And the sex zombie, he thought, would stay with him, and all the time he would not have to murder anymore.
I wasn't getting the satisfaction from having to kill people. So I took it to a new level. I had a hand drill that I use for normal things like installing my alarm system and everything. Drills a small bore with the skull very quickly. And with a large syringe, I filled that up with years and injected it into it.
Filled it?
Yeah, injected it into the front nose, hoping to produce a zombie-like state.
He was not interested in having a relationship with a willing victim. He wanted total control over a human body and do whatever he wanted.
Dahmer ontmoet de 14-jarige Conor Accent Symphony in een winkelcentrum. Hij probeert de nieuwe boortechniek op hem uit, maar maakt dan de fout hem alleen te laten.
I saw him sitting on the sidewalk. Two girls were with him. They called the police. They had to think of a story quickly. They told him that he was a friend who gets drunk. He was not wanting to go back, so one officer grabbed him by this arm, another officer grabbed him on the other arm, and they walked him up to the apartment. And they left. That's when I did the second EP.
Right away? And how long did it take from the die?
And that was
immediate.
Opnieuw heeft de politie zich laten misleiden door de innemende Dr. Jekyll-kant van Dahmer. Maar hij zit langzamerhand met een probleem. Want de lijken stapelen zich op en de stank uit zijn huis wordt merkbaar. Het zal op deze manier niet lang meer duren voor hij de aandacht zal trekken.
Jeff said that this was a continual problem, the smell. That his neighbors, the building supervisor, complained about the smell.
Sopakleba Princeville was destijds de huismeester van het flatgebouw waar Dahmer woonde. Hij kreeg veel klachten over de stank.
Somebody told me that it is coming from his apartment. And so I had to call him and ask him what's going on. Can't he clean up or what?
How did that go?
I'd either blame it on the freezer or the fish tank.
He said he almost passed out. What was in that?
3 headless torsos.
Yeah.
Stripped of flesh.
De man die een eind aan Dahmers terreur weet te maken is de 32-jarige Tracy Edwards. Na aan Dahmer te zijn ontsnapt rent hij de straat op met om een van zijn polsen een set handboeien. Hij weet een politieauto tot stoppen te bewegen.
Had the officer been able to unleash that handcuff, that may have been the end of it. So they went back to Dahmer's residence.
Jeff opened the door. They said who they were and what they wanted, but Jeff didn't have the key for the handcuff because the way he got the handcuffs back from his victims was by cutting off their hands.
When they entered the apartment, one of the officers saw some pictures in a bedroom of a skinning of a human being, looked at the pictures, was surprised, then looked around the room and realized he was in the very room where those pictures had been taken. He yelled out to his partner, "Grab him."
When I arrived, I saw Dahmer was arrested on the ground, handcuffed, and I was told by the officers to look in the refrigerator. At this time, when I did open up the refrigerator, what I found in there was an empty refrigerator with a cardboard box containing a freshly severed head of a black male. The eyes and the mouth were open. It should be stated that the interior of the refrigerator was immaculately clean. In the back was a box of Arm & Hammer baking soda, and on the side were condiments, mustard, ketchup, A1 sauce. I felt fear from the bottom of my feet all the way to the top of my head. You can't make sense of anything that looks so bizarre.
Eindelijk is een eind gemaakt aan de moordreeks van Jeffrey Dahmer. Wat bewoog hem eigenlijk om zijn slachtoffers te vermoorden, te verminken en zelfs op te eten? Was hij krankzinnig of juist niet?
In a long list of these, I mentioned the judge that commuted his sentence, the first police officer that let him go in Ohio. When he first got out, he was on probation, but not once during his entire time of being on probation did a probation officer come to his apartment, much less make a surprise visit to his apartment. Also, he was under court order to see a psychologist every month. And some of the days, he had just killed somebody over the weekend and chopped them up and threw them away. And then he was sitting in talking to the psychologist, putting on a front and being cleared to go.
Dit keer is het een ander verhaal, want Dahmer zit gevangen en wordt streng bewaakt. Hij beseft dat het voor hem afgelopen is en geeft een advocaat toestemming om namens hem de verdediging te voeren. Van middernacht tot vroeg in de ochtend onthult hij de details van zijn duivelse daden.
He didn't tell us about eating people right away. In the freezer part of the refrigerator, they found individually wrapped and prepared body parts. The thigh, bicep, heart, liver.
Tijdens het verhoor blijft Kennedy zich afvragen waarom Dahmer het heeft gedaan.
There was mental illness in his family, and that's not a stigma. I mean, a lot of our families have mental illnesses. The fact that there was a lot of arguing going on between his mom and dad and when he was growing up. The fact that he felt abandoned. I mean, all these things together, could they produce? Who knows?
Heeft hij aan zijn isolement in zijn puberteit verlatingsangst overgehouden die hem tot in zijn volwassen leven heeft achtervolgd?
We had discussions about love because I said, Jeff, why don't you just have a regular boyfriend? You know, I mean, and then you wouldn't have to kill these people. He said, people always left. I could never get anyone to stay with me. So I saw that the only way I can keep them with me was by killing them. But by actually eating the person, that this young man actually became part of Jeff Dahmer.
Dahmer did state that he there was not a victim of his crimes that he did not personally love and would like to have stayed with on a permanent level. It all boiled down to the same routine. When they were going to leave, that's when they died.
Ook Jeffrey Dahmer zelf kan geen goede verklaring geven voor zijn daden.
What do you account to the fact that you're getting into this so often?
The fact that I was desperately trying to make it so satisfied, but it never did completely.
Was het wel echt een simpele kwestie van niet kunnen krijgen waar hij naar zocht?
You met somebody who consensually would set up a living arrangement with you. Would you have abandoned then the procedure that you stayed with?
The person would have had to be totally compliant, willing to do whatever I wanted. There's just aren't many people like that.
That's true.
Er is geen enkele twijfel over de vraag of Dahmer de dader is. Tijdens het 60 uur durende verhoor bekent hij alles. En het bewijsmateriaal is overvloedig aanwezig. De vraag blijft alleen of hij al dan niet krankzinnig is. Als de rechtbank oordeelt dat Dahmer toerekeningsvatbaar is, krijgt hij levenslang. Zo niet, dan zal hij worden opgenomen in een psychiatrisch ziekenhuis waaruit hij ooit kan worden ontslagen. Openbaar aanklager Michael McCann besluit tot een bijzondere aanpak.
We have in Wisconsin what's called a bifurcated trial. We use the same jury, but we do it sequentially. First, did he do the slayings? Secondly, was he sane or insane at the time? So the second part of the trial was the real issue. That went on for several weeks in this very courtroom.
Dahmer vraagt zijn vroegere advocaat Gerald Boyle voor de verdediging. Boyle denkt dat zijn cliënt wel degelijk krankzinnig is.
Killing didn't obviously mean anything to him. He had no conscience. So he was not going to be rehabilitated, no matter who was working with him.
De meeste mensen zullen het vermoorden en opeten van een medemens als een uiting van krankzinnigheid zien. In de staat Wisconsin wordt iemand als toerekeningsvatbaar gezien als hij weet dat iets slecht is, maar het desondanks toch gewoon blijft doen.
Dahmer definitely knew what he was doing, but he didn't care. He justified what he was doing by his own standards. He knew it was against the law.
I think after you kill a certain number of people, you've lost all track of morality. You no longer feel constrained by the morals that bind most of us. Carver got a piece of equipment off an exercise machine, crept up upon Dahmer, and bludgeoned him to death.
I felt somewhat sorry for the man. He didn't seem right.
Welkom terug bij Reportage. In 1991 wordt Jeffrey Dahmer eindelijk gearresteerd. Hij heeft sinds zijn 18e gemoord en weet al die jaren uit handen van de politie te blijven. Op 17 februari 1992 hoort Dahmer onbewogen het vonnis aan, in aanwezigheid van familieleden van zijn slachtoffers. Hij wordt toerekeningsvatbaar geacht en krijgt daarom levenslang. Maar levenslang duurde in zijn geval niet lang.
Someone asked me once, how many people do you have to kill and eat before you're insane in Milwaukee? I can say this, that everyone who knew Dahmer, and I think the most skilled psychiatrists, said Dahmer was sane. That is even more frightening than believing Dahmer was insane. I believe he was sane and tragically evil.
I felt that was a just end for what he did. He needed to be removed from society forever, for the rest of his life. And I think that's what he should have got, and that's what he got.
Of course, we had 15 verdicts of guilty and 15 verdicts of sane while committing the crime. And then, of course, the sentence of the court was such that so long, 900 plus years, that he would never be released. When Dahmer went to the maximum security prison at Columbia, he came in contact with a minister or ministers and started reading the Bible and attending chapel there.
Geconfronteerd met het vooruitzicht op levenslange gevangenisstraf wendt Dahmer zich opnieuw tot het geloof om daarin troost en mogelijk verlossing voor zijn zonde te vinden. Uiteindelijk vraagt hij predikant Roy Radcliffe van de Church of Christ om hem in de gevangenis te dopen.
After I agreed to baptize him, he heaved a deep sigh of relief because he was afraid that I would say, I can't baptize you because your sins are too grievous, your sins are too bad, your sins are unforgivable. Well, that violates everything I've ever believed, and I would never say that. Jesus Christ came to save sinners. Jeffrey Dahmer was a sinner, and it's as simple as that. It was our first Thanksgiving holiday that was coming up, and so he made a big deal about giving this card to me, and it was written out and so forth. He talked about how much he was grateful for all that I'd done for him and how thankful he was that I was in his life and I hadn't given up on him. The only emotion he ever had confessed to regarding his murders was love. It wasn't hatred at all. And I never saw a sense of malice or anger or hatred toward any of his victims at all.
In november 1993 brengt de schizofrene gevangene Christopher Scarver 2 medegedetineerden om het leven. Een van hen is Jesse Anderson. De andere is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Scarver got a piece of equipment off an exercise machine, crept up upon Dahmer and bludgeoned him to death. And then crossed a gymnasium and bludgeoned to death Anderson.
He knew that he was going to be killed if he asked for the general population. And talking to the investigators said that the gentleman that was killed with him, Jesse Anderson, had all kinds of defensive marks where he tried to stop Carver. But Jeff Dahmer had no defensive marks on him, that all his strikes were from the beginning, from the head. And a very interesting thing, what I thought was interesting, was he was killed with a hand barbell, which is the same instrument he used to kill his very first victim.
He was a young man that I felt a friendship toward, and I'd lost a friend, and so I was very much in shock and disbelief about it at first.
I felt somewhat sorry for the man being beaten to death by another inmate. Didn't seem right. It's not supposed to be what happens in prison.
It did kind of shake me up a little bit. I don't know if this means I'm, not the macho guy I wanted to be, but I felt really conflicted about it. Because I had got to know him, I saw him as a very tragic figure. I guess I felt sad that he was dead, because I don't believe anybody needs to die like that.
He died pretty brutally, but you can't say he didn't deserve it, but still. I think at that point it's probably a relief to him, I would think. That was no kind of life.
I was kind of elated. I was kind of happy. I'm like, well, good riddance. I'm glad it's over. That's the least he can do for me, for taking my friend. And he didn't deserve to live, not after that.
Jeffrey Dahmer was cremated immediately, although his brain was removed at the request of his mother. She wanted the brain studied because she's trying to offset the belief that Lionel had suggested that somehow his brain was deformed. About a year later, the scientist involved with the brain decides there's no abnormality with his brain.
Waren de daden van Dahmer alleen aan de omstandigheden te wijten? Of was hij een geboren moordenaar?
No, I don't think he was born like that. I think it's environmental. And I disagree. I think anybody who in a young age is the victim of abject loneliness is probably going to have serious problems in life of one nature or another.
Did he choose evil? Yes. Was he an evil person? I can't say, and I wouldn't say that about anybody, especially after I spent so much time with him and saw parts of him that were very much like you and me. He had cares and loves and feelings like anybody else. Did he have some? I personally thought he was crazy. You'd have to be crazy to do what he did.
I don't think Dahmer was born to kill. I think Dahmer had the benefits of a good family, a basically good family, a decent area in which to be raised, educational opportunities. He chose not to accept them.
Wat zijn moorddadige leven ook mag hebben veroorzaakt, het heeft in elk geval diepe wonden geslagen in Milwaukee.
He scarred the city. He's done something that will probably take generations to heal, but for some people it'll never heal.
Tot zover deze reportage. Volgende week zijn we er weer met een opmerkelijke documentaire. Voor nu bedankt voor het kijken. Een hele goede nacht en graag tot volgende week zondag.